your support, I am fighting for our nation's future.
The president will discuss his historic decision to put the country above all else.
I think it's important not to legitimize a leader who has attacked democracy.
For the forces of civilization to triumph, America and Israel must stand together.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. On the campaign trail, Vice President Kamala Harris, who now inherits the role of presumptive Democratic nominee, makes stops in Indianapolis and Houston. Meanwhile, former President Trump will hold his first rally since President Biden dropped out of the race in Charlotte, North Carolina. That is later on this evening. And on Capitol Hill, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed Congress while thousands took the streets of Washington in protest. We will be live on Capitol Hill just a bit later this hour. But we start with our Weijia Jiang. She joins us from Indianapolis. Weijia, you're in an interesting position. You cover the President of the United States, but that person is no longer the candidate for presidential election in 2024. You cover the vice president in that capacity. So let's start with President Biden. To the degree you can, Weijia, outline tonight's address.
Well, remember, Major, tonight is the first time that we will hear from President Biden since he sent that stunning letter via social media on X announcing to Americans that he was going to step out of the race for 2024. We have barely seen him, and we certainly have not heard him say anything, which is precisely why he wanted this prime time slot to directly talk to the American public and explain why. But we also expect that he will focus on the time he does left as president and what he wants to accomplish in the next 6 months, while also reminding people what he has done in the past 3.5 years. Of course, this is a president who deeply cares about his legacy and at every turn tries to remind people what he has accomplished, because even though he is not running for re-election, of course, this time in office is incredibly important to this lifelong politician. And Major, I expect it's also an answer to the many Republicans that continue to ask, if he is not fit to run for re-election, why is he fit to serve as commander-in-chief? Because they argue that doing the job of president is much harder than running for re-election. But of course, now that he is off the trail, not going to these back-to-back events, crisscrossing across the country, he can focus on his job as commander-in-chief, which is precisely why he said he was stepping down, so he could give all of his attention to finishing out his term as president. Major?
And the event in Indianapolis for Kamala Harris, how was that received? Any noteworthy comments from the vice president?
So this was an event in her capacity as vice president. It had been on the books for a while now, and it was initially supposed to be a fireside chat with her. But I spoke with the president of Zeta Phi Beta, which is, of course, a historically black sorority that was hosting her here. And she said as soon as the news came out on Sunday, they had to rearrange quickly and make her this keynote speaker. And even though she was here in an official capacity, the lines are blurred between now and November, right? Because she is on the trail every moment that she is making a public appearance. And what I noticed, Major, today as well as yesterday, which was her first official campaign rally, is that her speeches have been relatively short, about 12 to 15 minutes long. But she goes right to the heart of the message that she wants to deliver. And today she said that it is a time for us to step forward. It is time not to look back, but to pave the way for future generations, to make sure we have leadership that can allow anybody, regardless of race, of where you come from, to rise up. And she asked directly for help. She said, in the past, you have helped, referring to the 6,000 sorority sisters who were in the room. You have helped mobilize, energize, and deliver results. And I need you to do that now. So it was, Major, a direct plea. As we know, the black vote was critical to helping President Biden win the White House in 2020, and support for him in this voting bloc had actually began to slip. And so I talked to the president again. She said she does think that Harris, as the nominee, will generate a new amount of support, that she's already seeing an enthusiasm that, frankly, Biden could not churn up, especially ahead of November.
Enthusiasm among the many words being applied, at least so far, to to Vice President Harris's candidacy. Weijia Jiang, thanks so very much. As Israel's war against Hamas continues with renewed attacks in the Gaza Strip, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addresses a joint meeting of Congress. Our Scott McFarland is on Capitol Hill, and he will join us next right here on America Decides.
With your support, I am fighting for our nation's future. And let us be clear about what that future looks like. I know the leaders in this room, and I know the future we believe in and we fight for.
Welcome back to America Decides. In Indianapolis today, well, by the way, that's harder to say than it sounds, in Indianapolis. Anyway, Kamala Harris asked the historically black sorority Zeta Phi Beta to help her defeat former President Trump. Vice President is a member of the first black intercollegiate sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha. I want to bring in our Elise Preston, who joins us from the battleground state of Arizona, Phoenix, to be precise. Elise, great to see you. What pitch did Harris make this afternoon in Indianapolis?
Well, Major, she addressed the thousands of these college-educated black women addressing certain issues that members of the sorority work to tackle: health justice, economic justice, and social justice. She painted a picture that the country is at a critical crossroads when it comes to this election. Here's just some of what she had to say.
In this moment, our nation needs your leadership once again. In this moment, I believe we face a choice between two different visions for our nation. One focused on the future, the other focused on the past.
Now, Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated has a membership of 125,000 college-educated women, very politically engaged. And it was just a coincidence that the vice president addressed them when it comes to timing. She had been talks to speak with them for the last couple of months. Vice President Harris actually spoke at her own convention earlier this month.
Elise, help the audience learn a little bit about the role of historically black sororities, not only in the black community, but America writ large.
Well, it's not just sororities, and it's also the fraternities, Major, that have played a major part when it comes to history, as you said, American history at large. We're talking 9 prominent black sororities and fraternities that have been politically engaged for more than a century. They first started Alpha Phi Alpha in 1906 for the purpose of community service, and that mission has extended generations later. You will find that members are very community service minded, very politically engaged. When you look at snapshots of history, members of these Black Greek letter organizations have always been there. They have been leaders in their community, leaders in organizations, leaders of marches, all kinds of things when you look at American history. And we're talking about a very vast network. Over the 9 fraternities and sororities, Major, we're talking about almost 2 million people initiated, all with the goal of community service within the black community.
Divine Nine, I believe, is the phrase. Also, Harris brings this up with some frequency. Proud graduate of Howard University. Talk to us, Elise, about the role of historically black colleges and universities in this conversation and this political campaign that Harris now leads for the Democrats.
You're right. She is a very proud graduate of Howard University, and that is just one of about 100 accredited universities in this country. Keep in mind that HBCUs were founded post-Civil War as a way to educate the formerly enslaved. So there is a lot of excitement right now just about the history of the moment that generations later you're seeing someone who graduated from one of those schools now be the likely candidate of a major presidential party. And so what you're seeing is a lot of excitement in this engagement. Now, these sororities, these fraternities, and the universities, because of their 501c3 status, they cannot endorse a candidate. They cannot endorse a party. But what you are seeing is them taking a stance on issues, like they have in years past. Now, you've seen sororities, you've seen fraternities, you've seen these HBCUs hold voter registration drives at large. You've seen them drive people to the polls. They have always been actively engaged in the community. And just recently, the presidents of the Divine Nine, as you pointed out, came together with a letter announcing a campaign of having a nonpartisan collective voter mobilization effort.
Elise Preston in Phoenix, thank you. And let me say, because you're in Phoenix, stay cool and please stay hydrated. Elise Preston, always great to see you.
Thank you.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu asked the United States to fast-track aid to Israel during his speech to a joint meeting of Congress today. The Israeli leader praised the United States for standing with Israel in its war against Hamas. Meanwhile, as he did so, thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters gathered in close proximity to the Capitol. Netanyahu made a point of denouncing these protesters, describing them as anti-Israeli activists, saying, quote, they should be ashamed of themselves, unquote.
Many anti-Israel protesters, many choose to stand with evil. They stand with Hamas. They stand with rapists and murderers. They refuse to make the simple distinction between those who target terrorists and those who target civilians, between the democratic state of Israel and the terrorist thugs of Hamas.
Scott McFarlane is following all of this for us from Capitol Hill. Scott, great to see you. Summarize the afternoon.
This is Benjamin Netanyahu speaking to a Congress where money for Israel must emanate from. And he's doing so making the argument that the enemies that are targeting Israel in the Middle East will be eventually targeting the United States, that they're in the sight line. He argued in so many words that if Israel's hands are tied, the U.S. is at risk. Our victory is your victory. Our fight is your fight, trying to lean into this argument that it is in the U.S. interest to help continue to fund through foreign aid and military support Israel and to support Israel in a more unifying way. The politics, though, Major, were just rippling through the chamber. You saw some of the empty seats on the Democrat side of the chamber. Dozens of them said they were not going to go there today. They were not going to give a further platform to Benjamin Netanyahu, whom they criticized for how he's prosecuting this war. One House member, Rashida Tlaib, held up a sign that said war criminal. And there were some criticisms of how Mr. Netanyahu addressed those concerns during his speech today. It's not a unified Congress on matters involving Gaza and the war in the Middle East. And Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't appear to have changed that today.
Scott McFarlane on Capitol Hill. Thank you very much. The net widens in Vice President Harris's search for a running mate. And the good news is our Nancy Cordes has brand new reporting on the potential contenders. She'll have that new reporting next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Thanks for hanging out with us. CBS News has brand new reporting on Kamala Harris's search for a running mate. Here's something you did know, because we're going to tell it to you for the first time. The list of potential vice presidential candidates now being vetted is now 12. How do we know that? Because Nancy Cordes reported that. She joins us now. Nancy, catch us up. What else can you tell us?
What I can tell you, Major, is that the team that is conducting the vetting for Vice President Harris has begun to hold conversations with that dozen or so individuals. Some of them are governors, some of them are senators, some of them don't even hold elective office right now. Those conversations began yesterday. And that number, 12, is larger than many had assumed, and it reflects the fact that this campaign wants to start by casting a wide net. It is not winnowing down that list just yet. It is, however, working on a very compressed schedule because they want to complete the vetting, Major, by August 7th in order to meet a potential reporting deadline in Ohio, which means they have just a couple of weeks to finish that process, hand all of their information over to the vice president so she can make a decision.
Does it in any way, Nancy, reflect a desire for Vice President Harris and those who are running this process to make sure that lots of people are thought about, meaning lots of people are included, so no one feels overlooked in this process? Sort of building out the constituency so everyone feels at least they had a shot.
It's almost like you've covered a campaign or two, Major. No question. That is a time-honored tradition. You put a bunch of names on the list so that lots of people feel that they've been considered, and more importantly, lots of voters in important states feel that that folks from their states were on the list, even if they don't end up getting the nod at the end of the day. And that's one of the reasons that the folks that are involved in this process are stressing that the list is currently still large. They are pushing back on this notion that it has already been reduced to one or two top individuals. And they point out, look, President Biden just stepped aside on Sunday. And then a new team had to be formed to perform the vetting for Kamala Harris. It's being led by former Attorney General Eric Holder. That team was established. And then the initial conversations between members of that team and some of the individuals on this list began just yesterday. So we are really in the infancy of this process.
And 2 cabinet secretaries on that list, as I understand it, correct?
Correct. At least 2. We know of Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation, who has, who has been out making the rounds over the past week, talking about this meltdown at Delta Airlines, but more broadly has proved to be a very effective campaign voice when it comes to pushing back, particularly on the new Republican vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, rather, and then also Gina Raimondo. She is the Secretary of Commerce. She's had a very successful tenure as the Secretary of Commerce. She helped to push the CHIPS Act through to produce more computer chips here in the United States. She's the former governor of Rhode Island, a longtime ally of the vice president, so not surprising to see her on the list as well.
It may or may not be determinative, but when you talk about a vetting process, having the ability to check Senate confirmed next to your name never, ever hurts. Nancy Cordes on the North Line of the White House, thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
This election, as I noted at the outset, is going to be about policies, not personalities. This is not personal with regard to Kamala Harris and her ethnicity or her gender.
House Republican leaders urge rank-and-file members to stop making comments about Vice President Kamala Harris's ethnicity and gender. As you just heard, our political panel will weigh in on that and much more. That's next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Former President Trump and Republicans running down ballot, well, they're wasting no time going after Vice President Kamala Harris. Pennsylvania Senate candidate David McCormick has this ad right now on the airwaves.
I am prepared to get rid of the filibuster to pass a Green New Deal. There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
Would you ban offshore drilling?
Yes.
What is the solution for voters in the fossil fuel industry?
Giving the workers an ability to transition.
I want to bring in our political panel, Kadia Goba and Nancy Cook. Kadia is political reporter for Semaphore. Nancy is senior national political correspondent for Bloomberg News. Great to see you both. I want to put this question to you. Who do you think now in this presidential race is the incumbent? Because during the primaries, Trump ran as a challenger and an incumbent. At the convention in Milwaukee, we all heard it, this glossy rendering of the incumbency of President Trump. Is Kamala Harris the incumbent or is Trump the incumbent? Nancy?
Well, that's a great question. I think that what has happened since Sunday when Biden dropped out of the race is that it's really flipped the script on the Trump campaign. And so now Trump seems more like the incumbent. Also, Trump seems like the older candidate. Right. He was the one that has been president and served in 4 years. And you've sort of seen his campaign really struggle in the last few days to deal with this new reality, come up with the fact that he's basically the incumbent, but also trying to figure out the best attack on Harris.
And Kadia, the reason I asked that question is that David McCormick does what you do when you're trying to create a new impression of a challenger, someone who's not really well known. Not going after Kamala Harris's present, meaning with the Biden agenda, but her past as a radical leftist or something like that. That tells me, at least in Pennsylvania, David McCormick says, no, Kamala Harris is the challenger, and we've got to figure out a way to redefine that challenger.
I think to Nancy's point, when you think about incumbency, you think about, the old guard or something that's stayed. And she is bringing this vibrant energy to the Democratic Party. So it's kind of propelling her, which is interesting because I would say, like, a few days ago, that was Donald Trump, especially after the shooting. We saw this burst of energy coming from the Republican Party. And like you said, things have now switched. And we see, even though she was a vice president, this new energy coming from her supporters and her.
Because the simple truth is, incumbency is a title, but it's also a state of mind. How voters perceive someone, how do they come to them? And look, right now, look at calendar year 2024. In democracies worldwide, incumbency is a very big drag. Check with the Tories in Britain. Check with Narendra Modi in India. Check with Emmanuel Macron in France. Good luck with the Olympics, by the way. So incumbency is just really bad. So trying to get out of this incumbency thing, to me, seems like a not insignificant part of the next 100 days.
Absolutely. And we've just seen so much enthusiasm for Harris's candidacy, as Khadija was saying, in the first few days. She's raised over $100 million. I think she's really exciting suburban women, for instance, who have really turned away from the Republicans. Black voters are excited. I talked with, some political strategists today. The whole electoral map is changing. Democrats think Georgia, for instance, could be back in play, whereas the Republicans thought they had that locked up. So it's really just a whole new race, and I think that we're seeing, a ton of momentum and enthusiasm behind Harris, and the Trump campaign, struggling to deal with that.
Khadija, talk to me about this thing that Republicans, we just heard Richard Hudson on our air, chairman of the NRCC, National Republican Congressional Campaign Committee, telling members, focus on the issue, stop talking about DEI, stop saying that, using that coded language. What have we seen in the last 48 hours on that front?
Oh, well, the exact opposite. We even saw Speaker Johnson urging his members not to talk about anything related to race or sexism. But, I feel like Republicans can't help themselves. We saw Tim Burchett talk about her being a DEI candidate. I've been since asking people, am I a DEI reporter? What does that mean? Or Glenn Grothman saying something like, oh, well, the campaign or the party had to coalesce around her because of her racial background. So, yeah, it would behoove them to stay the course. I did some reporting similar to, basically black members of Congress, especially women, are saying that they're going to have her back. She's not even going to have to fight that battle, which I think is interesting also. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting, and I think it's not popular now these days to use that sort of rhetoric.
Well, whether it's popular or not, it's acceptable in some quadrants of the Trump coalition. No question about that. But to your point, Nancy, in battleground states, where did Biden win the election in 2020? In the suburbs and the exurbs. Not so popular there. This DEI language.
Absolutely. And what we have seen is that, the Trump campaign was really going after Biden on things like inflation and immigration. And, those messages, they're still sort of throwing the spaghetti at the wall on those things, and those are still vulnerabilities for Democrats. But what we're seeing is it's getting so muddied with this DEI talk or, trying to paint Harris as a San Francisco liberal or someone more liberal than Biden. There's just like a raft of messages that they're trying out, and they haven't really settled on one. And what I think they run the risk of really alienating swing voters, suburban women, young people, Hispanics, with these messages that have sort of subtle racist and sexist undertones.
Khadija, what do you think the stakes are for the running mate choice for Kamala Harris?
I think it's a big opportunity for her to, quell some of the talk about whether or not she can handle it. She'll probably, it'll be interesting who she picks, right? Will she focus on a Kelly who,
Mark Kelly, senator from Arizona.
Senator Mark Kelly, although Arizona is trending blue, right? It'd be nice to, grab.
And someone who was a critic of immigration policies in his 2022 re-election campaign.
Also, if that could contribute to helping the Senate, push the Democratic member for the Senate, that would be also very helpful. So I think there's a lot at stake in terms of who she picks and what that means and how much it energizes or captures a group that she hasn't already energized.
Or picks up a battleground state. Khadija Goba, Nancy Cook, always great to see you. Thanks so very much. President Biden, you might have read about something He's out of the 2024 presidential race, just FYI. Republicans, of course, have turned their attention to the vice president, Kamala Harris. Next, Trump ally, Florida Congressman Byron Donalds joins us for more on all of this. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. For some time now, Republicans have focused on persuading Americans President Biden simply unfit to serve. Well, now that he's exited the 2024 presidential race, the Republican Party is shifting its attention, quite naturally, to Vice President Kamala Harris. Republican Congressman Byron Donalds joins me now to discuss this. Congressman Donalds is a member in good standing of the Takeout Podcast Hall of Participants. He doesn't know that's a thing, but trust me, it's a thing. Congressman Donalds, good to see you. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Very well. Do you want an explanation from President Biden this evening in his primetime address?
I think the nation deserves one, 100%. He's the person that actually got votes in the Democratic primary process to be their nominee. And now, inexplicably, he's leaving. Kamala Harris now is soaking up all the delegates. Apparently, she has them all to get their nomination. She's not received a single vote, whether in the 2024 primary or the 2020 primary, to be a major party nominee. So Joe Biden does owe the country an explanation.
Is it just a political explanation that you see, Congressman Donalds, or an explanation about what comes next for the remainder of his lame duck presidency?
It's both, actually. Joe Biden is president of the United States. He holds the nuclear football. He gets the daily presidential briefing. We're not just talking about just a random campaign. He is sitting in the Oval Office, and if he's not going to stand for election because his poll numbers are atrocious and the Democrat Party forced him out, then there has to be a concrete reason why. And if it's simply because he cannot win, then there's a serious question, why do they think he can't win? And then if that has to do with his mental capabilities, then why should he continue to serve out the rest of his term as commander-in-chief?
On our program, before you were able to come on, Congressman Donalds, your colleague Richard Hudson, who, as you know, is the chairman of the National Republican Congressional Committee, said that members running for election in 2024 should focus on the issues and not say things like Kamala Harris is a DEI candidate or DEI vice president. Do you agree?
I do agree. I think if you take a look at where we are right now, like I said, Kamala Harris looks like she's going to be the nominee of the Democrat Party. But her agenda and her record is just as bad as Joe Biden's. Massive inflation, which has crippled middle-income families and poor families in our country. Kamala Harris was the tie-breaking vote in the Senate because the Senate was 50-50 for that bill, the American Rescue Plan, to move forward, which unleashed its inflation, which has hurt every working family in our country. Number two, she is the border czar. Joe Biden dubbed her the border czar. She went to the border once for about 30 minutes, and she did nothing. While Americans have been suffering, whether it's a red state or a blue state, she did nothing. She was derelict in her duty and the job that Joe Biden assigned her. So because she was a failure to the American people, she doesn't deserve to now get a promotion into the presidency of the United States. I believe that's where our colleagues should focus their attention, because her record has been bad for all of America.
Have you had any conversations along these lines, Congressman Donalds, with your Republican colleagues who seem to have no trouble bringing up this DEI language?
We had that conversation, and if we're going to be honest, the members are actually not talking about that anymore. But we can't control when the media likes to play a clip from 2 days ago and run it over and over and over again. I will also add, I've had an opportunity to listen to Kamala Harris on the stump. She's not talking about the issues facing the American people: inflation, border security, a foreign policy where we are in the middle of two conflicts on the world stage. She's not talking about that. She's coming up with the old tropes of not going back so we can go forward. I listened to it. It doesn't mean anything. It's phraseology to trigger an emotional response, but it's not going to deal with the issues facing the American people. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are talking about those issues. They're talking about the policies that our country is going to need to truly move forward and to become great once again.
Congressman Donalds, Winston Churchill addressed the United States Congress 3 times. Benjamin Netanyahu delivered his 4th address this afternoon. The importance of today's speech from your perspective?
The number one thing was to make the world understand that we stand with Israel with no equivocations. They are our greatest ally in that region. We stand with the Jewish people, and we stand with the state of Israel. Bibi Netanyahu gave a tremendous address today. There was no sugarcoating what his position is with respect to Hamas and with respect to the resolve of Israel doing everything in their power to get the hostages back. I thought it was a great speech. I've been on Capitol Hill 4 years. It's the best speech I've heard in that chamber in my 4 years here. He did a great job today, and that's what the world needs to hear. The time has come for strength and leadership, not cute phrases that make everybody feel good, because those cute phrases are not backed up by sound policy that actually promote the lives of whether it's the American people here at home or our Israeli friends abroad or anybody else across the globe.
Florida Congressman, Republican Byron Donalds, thanks so much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Who could Kamala Harris choose as her running mate? Our reporters are tracking some of her potential picks. That reporting is next. You are streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. As we've fairly well established, the nation still does not know who Vice President Kamala Harris will choose as her running mate. The good news? Our reporters are following a few of the potential picks.
I'm Camila Montoya Galvez in the battleground state of Arizona. President Biden carried the state in the Sun Belt by only 10,000 votes in 2020, and the margins of victory here are again expected to be very small come November of this year. Vice President Harris is certainly facing an uphill battle in trying to turn the state blue yet again, but some Democratic voters here told us that she will have a better chance of winning Arizona by selecting Senator Mark Kelly as her running mate. Kelly, of course, is a former U.S. Navy pilot and the husband of Gabby Giffords. He's also a former astronaut, but importantly, he is viewed as a moderate and pragmatic voice in a deeply divided U.S. Congress. That profile, some argue, can help the Harris campaign attract independent voters as well as disaffected Republicans who are absolutely crucial here in Arizona. To win the state in the Sun Belt, the Harris campaign will also need to galvanize young voters and Latinos who make up 25% of the electorate here. Republicans, however, argue that concerns about inflation, the economy, and illegal crossings along the Mexican border will help former President Trump carry the state in November.
I'm Shauna Mizell in Kentucky, where the state's governor, Andy Beshear, has been floated as a potential running mate for Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, what makes Beshear unique is the fact that he's a two-term Democratic governor in a state like Kentucky that traditionally votes for Republicans. And he talks a lot about bipartisanship as well, so that could be an advantage when it comes to bringing in moderate or independent voters. Now, Beshear has also been a very vocal supporter of abortion rights, and that could complement a lot of the work that we saw Harris doing out on the campaign trail before Biden dropped out of the race. We know that Harris embarked on a reproductive freedoms tour, hitting multiple battleground states and attempting to tie restrictive abortion bans to the legacy of her could-be opponent if she is the nominee, Donald Trump. And speaking of Donald Trump, Beshear could also provide a counter to Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is a senator from Middletown, Ohio, but he has roots in Kentucky as well, in the Appalachia area. And over the past few days, we've seen J.D. Vance and Beshear trading barbs back and forth. But as of yesterday, Beshear told reporters that he has not yet been asked to submit vetting materials to the Harris campaign.
Earlier today, Governor Roy Cooper delivered remarks about a clean energy project in the state. Now, all eyes have been on Cooper as of late because of speculation that Vice President Harris might ask him to join her as her running mate. Now, Cooper would make a valuable addition to the ticket, given that he is a rather popular candidate here in North Carolina, a key battleground state where Donald Trump won just narrowly in 2020. Cooper has maintained support from both Democrats and Republicans and could be useful when trying to appeal appeal to those more moderate voters that are so crucial this election year. But on a more personal level, Harris and Cooper go back way over a decade. The two know each other from their days as attorney generals of their respective states. They have developed a strong friendship over the years, and we have seen Cooper on the campaign trail with Harris multiple times this year. Now, Cooper has said that he backs Harris 100%. And while reporters have consistently asked him if he would accept Harris's request to join her as her running mate, he has remained rather coy about the subject and said he wishes to respect her selection process. However, he continues to voice his support from her and said he will do whatever he can to make sure that she wins in November and to make sure that Donald Trump stays out of the White House in November.
And we thank you all for your reporting. Have you caught your breath yet? It has been a hell of a couple of weeks in America, and I've been asked over and over, has there ever been 2 weeks in American history like this? The answer, yes and no. I'll get to the yes part in a moment. The no part matters a lot because social media and its parallel meme and disinformation factories make big news feel bigger and echo louder. And in that sense, we've never been through 2 weeks like this. We have had cataclysmic news test our nation, and interestingly, in 2-week spans. April 1865. Richmond Falls, the tattered Confederacy contemplates guerrilla war against the North. Robert E. Lee surrenders to Ulysses S. Grant in Appomattox. Lincoln is assassinated, the first presidential assassination in U.S. history. A plot to decapitate Lincoln's government nearly succeeds. A vicious hunt for Lincoln's assassin ensues. A shattered North tries to imagine the presidency of Andrew Johnson, a successor overwhelmed, as Lincoln never was, by the sweep of history and the burdens of preserving the Union. All of that in 2 weeks. August 1945, President Truman orders atomic weapons first dropped on Hiroshima and then Nagasaki. Japan surrenders. Churchill uses the phrase Iron Curtain for the first time to describe the emerging Cold War in a speech to the British Parliament. Related, something called the Viet Minh launch a revolution against the colonial French in Vietnam. All of that in 2 weeks. April 1968, Lyndon Johnson announces peace talks with the North Vietnamese. Martin Luther King Jr., preparing to support a sanitation worker strike, is assassinated in Memphis. Riots erupt in 80 cities. At least 40 people die. President Johnson signs the 1968 Civil Rights Act, which includes the Fair Housing Act that bans for the very first time segregation in housing. The Soviets invade Czechoslovakia. All of that in 2 weeks. June 1968, Robert F. Kennedy wins the California Democratic primary. After his victory speech, Kennedy is assassinated inside the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Days later, James Earl Ray is arrested in London, charged with the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. U.S. Army General William Westmoreland, undone by the stalemate in Vietnam, steps down. Chief Justice Earl Warren retires from the Supreme Court. All of that in 2 weeks. These spasms of history I've just summarized, they don't even include 9/11 or COVID. Those are fresher memories. As a nation, here's the point. We've been through moments like this before, where 2 weeks feels like 2 months or maybe even 2 years. It takes us time to regain our bearings and to try to make sense of it all. That is the work ahead, just as it was before, to make sense for ourselves and our posterity, this history we are living, this history we are writing. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.